Welcome to tonight's forum for candidates seeking to represent State House District 49. I'm Gary Castor, Managing Editor of the Jefferson City News Tribune, and I'll serve as moderator of tonight's forum. Seated next to me is Lane Strassner, News Tribune Community Engagement Editor. She will serve as timekeeper tonight, and she helped organize tonight's forum. I want to take this opportunity to thank the city for the use of these city council chambers for the forum. Prior to tonight, the candidates were advised the rules of the forum. The forum will include an opening statement, general questions for the candidates, and closing statements. The candidate will be given 1 minute for an opening statement, and then we'll begin asking a series of questions in which he has 2 minutes to respond to each question. You may notice this is a 3-person race for District 49. At this time, we have one of the candidates here. The other 2 are not here, but I would like to go ahead and say who is running for this race. So with us, we have Jim Schulte, a 41-year veteran of the Army Reserve and National Guard, as well as a former Missouri State Highway Patrol officer. He owns a Fulton Area Shooting Academy. Shannon Graziano, who served in the Marine Corps until he was medically discharged in 2013, is also running. He then got his Bachelor of Science degree in Physical Education from William Woods. The third person is Steve Myers, who joined law enforcement in 1982 and was the former Fulton Police Chief for 19 years. He's currently retired. All 3 are seeking the Republican nomination for the seat. The winner of the race will face Jessica Sills, a Democrat, in the November 8th general election. So, as we get ready to begin, I'll ask Jim first, let's set aside all notes and everything that you might have, and we'll begin our questioning after your opening statement.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me tonight. My name is Jim Schulte. I'm running for state representative because I can no longer stand by and not try to make a difference for my children and grandchildren. I believe we are engaged in a war of principles, of good versus evil. When I was a young man, I read a quote by Edmund Burke. He said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." I've tried to live my life by those words. I'm pro-life. I believe life begins at conception. The pin I wear is called Precious Feet. It's the exact size and shape of a 10-week-old baby's feet. And it's also why I'm endorsed by Missouri Right to Life. I support the Second Amendment. I'm a benefactor member of the NRA. I'm a certified instructor, and I teach concealed carry classes. I support our community because of my leadership in the Missouri Guard. I've been involved in every state emergency since the flood of '93 through the Joplin tornado. In 2006, I led a task force of 200 soldiers to guard the border in Yuma, Arizona, working directly with the Border Patrol. So I've witnessed our border crisis firsthand.
All right. Yeah, you're at your 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just start with some questions.
Okay.
So if elected, what's your number 1 priority?
I think my number 1 priority will be to try to downsize Missouri government. Over the years, I've witnessed that we come up with new programs and new ideas for issues that have arisen. We never look back and redo or rethink old programs that are no longer needed or have become obsolete. I think by readjusting the size of government and getting rid of inefficiencies and waste, we can free up tax money for other programs.
Okay, so give me an example of one area where you believe we could downsize.
When I started campaigning, I had someone come up to me and say, "Do you realize that the Department of Revenue has a program where they gather data and collect all this information and make annual reports? And the Highway Patrol has the same number of people doing the same thing and gathering the same data, and they never talk to each other." So I think a full audit of all of our agencies to get rid of redundancy and programs that are no longer viable would be important.
Okay. So if asked, I'm sure all the candidates in this race as Republicans would identify yourselves as conservative. Much of the last legislative session and even in many of the local races, the discussion has been about if the office holder or challenger is conservative enough. So define for me what a conservative is and how that compares to what your opponent's vision of conservatism is.
Well, I can only speak for myself, but my vision is that the Constitution is our foundation for everything, and we need to study it and make sure that we don't get outside the boundaries of it or try to expand it or modify it.
Okay. Our state's motto is, let the welfare of the people be the supreme law. How would you put the welfare of the people ahead of party and special interests?
Well, I think when we do any type of legislation or any people approach us for legislation, I look back on when I was a leader in the military, and the biggest question I had to answer for my soldiers was why. Why are we doing this? Why are you doing what you're doing? What made you decide to do this? And why do we have to be the ones to do it? So I weigh heavily on the why question about everything that we approach and want to do, to see, is it legal? Is it viable? Is it ethical? And is it something we need for the betterment of people? Or is it a special interest thing that will not be for the good of the population?
Okay. You know, when you look at District 49, it has some issues with rural health care. So what role, if any, should state government have in regards to helping rural communities maintain a high level of health care?
Well, the healthcare issue up there stems from the local hospital has had trouble maintaining staff and staying open. My wife is a healthcare RN, so I understand a big portion of the problems we're faced with healthcare right now is in the billing process, the Medicare process, and the insurance. I think we need to look at that and see, are we as a government hamstringing the process with over-regulation and overburdening people with requirements that keep them from doing that? We have probably one of the strictest physician assistant programs in the country. So I would be in favor of looking at other states, seeing what they're doing and does it work for them, and then adopting that process to help us here provide more healthcare workers for the rural communities.
So explain to me how loosening the physician assistance regulations would help.
Well, actually, when I was knocking on doors the other night, I met a physician's assistant, and he said, I can go to any other state around here and make 2 to 3 times the money I'm making here because of what I'm allowed to do. He said physician assistants here are very restricted in what they're allowed to do legally with treatment and prescription of drugs. And he said it's something that needs to be relooked because other states are having great success with it. So that's why I say I would have to look at any program we do. If other states are already doing it and it's successful, then I think we need to look at that and see if it has a place here in Missouri.
Okay. The state's gas tax has come under fire as the price at the pump has just risen exponentially in recent months. Do you support the gas tax? And if so, why? If no, why not?
Well, I do not. I mean, it's probably been one of the biggest complaints of the people that I've talked to for the last 3 months. I can just speak for the citizens of Callaway County, but the vast majority hate it. Again, I think if we operate more efficiently in government and use the funds we have more efficiently, we would have to look at that and see if it's feasible to do the maintenance and repair. We have a huge highway network system in this state, one of the largest in the country, and we have one of the lowest gas taxes. However, it's not popular with people, and so I think it needs to be studied further and find out, are there other ways? I'm told we have a surplus of money in revenue. I'm not sure all the possibilities were explored to the fullest.
You would agree that the state's transportation infrastructure is deteriorating, though, right?
It's horrible.
Okay. So how would you address the deteriorating condition, realizing that the federal money is a one-time thing, right? It's not, these are long-term issues as far as that deterioration. This is not something that's going to be fixed in 1 year. So what would you suggest would be the better approach to try to address not only the immediacy of the deterioration, but ongoing?
Well, again, a lot of good people voted for the tax, and I've got to believe that they did it with a good reason, and I would want to sit down and talk to them and see what the deciding factor was as to why they did it and what motivated them to go ahead and vote for that tax, and talk to the ones that didn't and see why they were not. I think the general public was not behind closed doors on all those meetings to see what went on, so I would have to be better informed by both sides as to what brought them to their conclusions so I could make an informed decision.
Okay. During the last session, transgender issues became a hot button issue among legislators. What legislation on this topic would you support if you're elected?
I don't think we need to be teaching transgender in schools, and I don't think we need to have crossover in athletics among transgender athletes. I would not support doing that.
Another hot button issue is critical race theory, which is the way race and racism influence politics, culture, and the law. Much of the consternation about CRT dealt with whether it was or should be taught in public schools. How do you stand on CRT? Do you believe it to be an issue currently for public schools? Why or why not?
First of all, I think it's an issue in some schools in some areas. I frankly think that the underlying message of CRT is a Marxist message. I believe there's one race, and that's the human race. And when we work together and stop dividing and fighting, we will get results and work together to solve the tensions and the problems that we're experiencing.
So you say some schools. Do you believe that the problem exists in the 49th?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Last year, the legislature passed a grant initiative that would help schools bring their base teacher pay up to $38,000. Is that adequate? Would you try to build on that legislation, and if so, how?
Well, I firmly believe our teachers are understaffed and underpaid, and so if we can help them without causing undue burden on the taxpayers, then I would support better pay for them. But I also want to look at the staffing and make sure that it's going to teachers and we're not just bloating our administrations.
Okay. In light of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, what legislation would you support at the state legislature in the next legislative session on the topic of abortion?
I think the Missouri legislators already solved it. I think that we have it in place now, and I'm not aware of any future legislation pending. So I'm not sure I understand what you're looking for.
Well, some states would criminalize helping women go across state borders to get abortions, things such as that. Other types of legislation beyond the current law that exists.
Okay, I would not support criminalizing interstate travel for any reason or any purpose. I don't think our founding fathers had that in mind. I believe life begins at conception. I think there's science to support that now. And so my goal would be, how do we help that mother through the process with support and counseling, and let her decide, how do we preserve this life until she can decide, does she want to keep it or does she want to adopt it, the baby.
Okay. So in your opening statement, you made mention that you were a strong gun rights supporter. So when it comes to gun rights, what legislation would you support if elected as legislator?
I'm not aware of any that needs to be supported as introduced. I'm not in favor of changing the gun laws we have. I'm a firm believer the Second Amendment is the cornerstone of our Constitution, and it needs to be kept that way.
Okay. Let me walk you through some of the restrictions that have been proposed.
Okay.
So, should training be required before a gun can be purchased?
No.
Why?
To purchase a gun, why would we require anyone to be trained? We don't require them to train on anything else if they purchase it. I don't think there's a constitutional requirement. Our founding fathers said the right to keep and bear arms is at the foundation of our rights. So training's good. I encourage it. I teach it, but I certainly don't mandate it.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I guess I would add, you know, if you're going to learn to drive, you have to pass a test. You have to show your proficiency as an example, right?
Yeah, I understand that, but the driving is not a constitutional right. It's a privilege.
Okay.
Firearms ownership's a constitutional right, so there's the difference.
Okay. Should there be restrictions on the purchase of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines?
Okay, I'll first ask you to define assault weapons. What does that mean?
I would think it would be weapons that are more associated in a military setting than on my father's farm, for instance.
Okay. I spent 41 years in the military.
Mm-hmm.
I was a drill sergeant when I was 20 years old and started firearms training then. So for the next 40 years, I was training soldiers. I ran the marksmanship program for the Missouri National Guard for 9 years. Deployed to Afghanistan twice, trained soldiers for the deployment, and after they returned, trained troops to go over there. In 40 years, I never once trained anyone to carry or shoot an AR-15. None of my soldiers ever carried one. I think it's a mischaracterization of the firearm to call it that.
Okay. So let me rephrase the question then.
Okay.
All right. Should there be restrictions on the purchase of weapons with high-capacity magazines?
No.
Why?
The magazine is a removable part. It's not actually part of the weapon. It's just an attachment that you add on or remove. If you take a 30-round magazine or 3 10-round magazines, you still have the same amount of firepower and can reload in next to no time. None of the incidents that have been involved, the few incidents where rifles have been used, would it have impacted the results on any of them?
Should Missouri have a red flag law that would allow judges to remove firearms from someone considered a danger to themselves or others, such as domestic violence?
I think first we have to look at our mental health provisions in the state. The serious issue we have is our mental health, and how do we determine? Red flag laws have been used by vindictive spouses or other people just to mischaracterize an individual, and then they lose their rights and can't get them back without having to hire lawyers and spend money that they don't have in the first place. So I'm opposed to the red flag law and the way it's been presented in the past.
Okay. How might it be more appealing to you to do it?
I think if we have mental institutions that have deemed that a person is dangerous to themselves or others, then there would be some court action involved to stop that, and for their own well-being and the well-being of those around them.
Okay.
But it would be a professional that has evaluated them and worked with them to make that call. Someone with the qualifications of a psychologist or psychiatrist.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to a different topic.
Okay.
All right. Governor Parsons said he will call a special session on the topic of tax relief. What sort of tax relief do you think is realistic and will sustain the state's operations while giving relief to taxpayers?
I think we need to look at the states that have been growing and bringing people in there because of their tax system and take a hard look at, say, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, states that have a fair tax or a flat tax that is causing people to move there from other states, evaluate that and compare it to what we have in Missouri and see, can we make a more efficient tax system for our citizens?
Okay. A common theme of candidates I've heard this election series is the elimination of property taxes, or at least restricting them, which, as we know, property taxes are the local revenue sources for school districts, fire districts, libraries, etc. So if those property taxes were to be removed or to be reduced, how would you suggest these entities should be funded?
Well, again, we need to look at other states that are doing that and see what their system is. You still need some income. I think most of them are doing it through sales taxes, where you pay more sales tax. It actually becomes a consumption tax, so you pay taxes on what you buy and what you use. Mm-hmm. Whereas paying it for your property and over again, we've reached a point where we don't own our own property anymore. The government owns it and we're renting it with tax money.
Right. For those of your constituents who are of the lower income, though, that they would be bearing a larger burden with the sales tax, though, right?
There are provisions in these other state laws that cover that, and at a poverty level, reduced rates or no rates for those people.
Let's switch to schools again. Do you believe school boards are held accountable to the people under current laws, and would you support additional legislation regarding school boards?
I think school boards are supposed to be the voice of the people and answer for them. And I admire people that take that challenge on and run for those offices. Mm-hmm. I think it varies district to district around the state. And so I would have to take it on a case-by-case basis and see. I know we have school boards in Callaway County that people are very happy with, and I know there's some they're disgruntled with. Mm-hmm. So, and I haven't dug deep enough into the dissatisfaction to be able to say we need to fix, change, or do something different. I would have to have more information before I committed to any changes.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about elections. We're getting ready to have a primary election here. The Secretary of State's repeatedly said that there were no election issues in Missouri in the 2020 election. He and others in the legislature, though, have campaigned election reform in this last session. What specific concerns, if any, do you have about election integrity in Missouri? How would you address it? Should anything else be considered as far as election reform if you're elected as a legislator?
Well, I would want to know if we have a system in place that audits the voter rolls to make sure that they are correct and we don't have an imbalance of people on the rolls that aren't voting or alive still. that needs to be verified and continuously monitored. I know with the COVID, we had the mail-in ballots were allowed, but they had to be certified. And so I thought that was a good idea. It prevents the voter fraud from happening. I'm not aware of any other issues in Missouri. I thought we had a fairly solid election in this state.
Okay. So you would anticipate no need for further election reform?
Unless something's brought to my attention that I'm not aware of. I mean, again, it's if somebody brings it to me, I want to know why and what precipitated that request and what happened. And then if I'm convinced that something is out of sync or improperly being handled, then I would certainly want to correct that.
Okay. Okay. Well, Jim, at this point, I think we'll go to our closing statements. And I'll give you a couple minutes, let's say 2 minutes, to do your closing statement.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll just let everybody know I'm a Christian, a husband, a father and a grandfather. I'm a veteran of the military and law enforcement. I spent 41 years in the military, serving both as a part-time and a full-time citizen soldier. During that span, I served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, and I retired as a State Command Sergeant Major of the Missouri National Guard. I was a highway patrolman for 5 years. When I left the Highway Patrol in 1980, I became a reserve deputy, and I'm still an active reserve deputy here. My wife and I attend Trinity Lutheran Church, where we volunteer regularly, and I serve as leader of the security team. I've served on the board of directors for the Central Missouri at Red Cross. I was on that board for 8 years, and 2 of those years I was chairman of the board. I'm a small business owner, and Janelle and I have we have a farm in Callaway County where we raise Dexter cattle. We've been supporting disabled veterans for the last 9 years by hosting deer and turkey hunts on our place. We're also program coordinators for the Neighborhood Watch program with the Callaway County Sheriff's Department. We have dedicated our lives to public service. Janelle's a registered nurse, and she's been with me every step of the way. This country, this community have given me more opportunities in my life than I could have ever imagined. I'll be a staunch supporter of our veterans, our first responders, school reform, and the unborn. That's why I've placed my name on the ballot as a representative, and I thank you for your time.
All right. Well, Jim, thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to take a break here for a moment, and we're going to resume. I'm going to say in about 15 minutes, let's say 6:45. Again, for those who may have just joined, this was the forum for the 49th District. 2 of the candidates were unable to be here tonight, and so our forum ran a little bit shorter. Certainly it wasn't through a shortage of questions, so again, I thank you for answering those questions. We'll take about a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back with our forum for the 59th District. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you want it on?
Do you guys have any questions before we get started?
I don't think so.
So we'll start with the first opening statement.
Okay.
After the introduction. All right. Thank you. Hey guys, we're gonna get started here just in just a couple minutes. So appreciate you guys coming. Is Rick ready for us? Welcome back to tonight's forum for candidates seeking to represent State House District 59. I'm Gary Castor, Managing Editor of the Jefferson City News Tribune, and I'll serve as moderator of tonight's forum. Seated next to me is Lane Strassner, News Tribune Community Engagement Editor. She'll serve as timekeeper tonight, and she organized tonight's forum. Prior to tonight, the candidates were advised the rules of the forum. Tonight's forum will include opening statements, general questions for the candidates, and then closing statements. Candidates will be given 1 minute for an opening statement. I will then begin asking a series of questions of the candidates. They'll have 2 minutes to respond to each question. None of the questions were shared with the candidates beforehand. Candidates are asked to put aside all of their notes and materials. During the course of the forum, only the pads of blank paper can be on your desktop. During the course of the forum, I may ask a candidate a follow-up question in hopes of getting a clearer understanding of a stance. A candidate may also be granted time to respond or to rebut an answer from his opponent. We ask the audience to refrain from expressing your support or opposition to a candidate by applause or making noise during the forum, as well as refrain from using a flash if taking photographs. Now let me introduce the candidates for tonight's forum. To my left is Rudy Veed, the incumbent who was elected to the seat in 2018. He retained his seat in 2020 when he ran unopposed. He's an attorney. He and his wife, Jerry, have 4 children and 6 grandchildren. He lives in Wardsville. George Bacon is a retiree from construction and nuclear energy industries. He lives in Jefferson City with his wife, Mary. They have 2 children. Both are seeking the Republican nomination for the seat. There are no other candidates from other parties seeking the seat, meaning the election on August 2nd will determine the general election in November. For the order of the opening and closing statements, they were determined before the forum by drawing lots. So each candidate will be given 1 minute for his opening statement, and we'll begin with George. So George, take it away.
Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. I am George Bacon. I'm running against Mr. Veed for the 59th District Representative for the state of Missouri. You mentioned I have my wife, Mary. I also have 4 grandchildren and 5 granddogs. I did work for the construction industry, and I am retired. I was born and raised in Jefferson City. I graduated from JC High School. Had a small business here. My first job, I was still in high school when I started working at Charles E. Still Hospital in the pharmacy. It was a 40-hour-a-week job from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 at night. And I did fill prescriptions as a teenager. I just wanted to let you know. Rules were a little different back then. So I've had to grow up in a hurry. I transferred from the pharmacy department to respiratory therapy and was on the Code Blue team at Still Hospital. So that's the brief portion of that.
All right, thank you. Rudy?
My name's Rudy Veed. And again, I thank you all. I was raised in St. Thomas, Missouri, of one of 9 children. I have many of my brothers and sisters here tonight. I have 8 grandchildren. I have grandchildren that are here with me tonight. My wife Jerry here. We got married in 1974. But even as a child, we learned about giving and participating. At 9 years old, we were serving in church. At 9 years old, I was in 4-H. At 16, because of our large family and everything, we all had to keep jobs. You know, I went to work at the charcoal plant and the briquette plants. I worked all through high school at the briquette plants and charcoal plants. After high school at Blair Oaks High School, I went to the University of Missouri in Ag Econ, graduated in Ag Econ. All while I was there, I sold equipment. I worked for Genesis Roofing. I worked in sale barns. I laid carpet in the building that we are in. Then I graduated from law school in 1979. I started in Jeff City in 1978. I've been in private practice since 1978. I graduated, I worked in the firm as a law clerk. No time.
All right.
Can we borrow time?
No, I'm sorry. Okay, so just to make sure, so she'll signal, give you a little bit of a time notice, the second hand wave, it's time to wrap things up, okay? So, the objective behind it is, honestly, we get more questions in, so let's be concise with our answers. And the goal is, obviously, we want voters to get the best sense of who you are, who you will be as a legislator. So let's just jump into it. So we'll start with Rudy. You're the first one. If elected, what's your #1 priority?
The #1 priority is to do a lot what I have been doing up there. I have approximately 11 bills that we didn't pass last year, still pending, that I've worked on. But my role up there has been very much that I work with other representatives. I try to carry a lot of bills that I call just necessary for the state to operate. Get referrals from the judicial system, from different state agencies, and people to address people with general bills. I don't carry the gun bill and that, except, you know, this year on eminent domain, for instance, they came and called me and wanted to meet with them as they were drafting the bill in the last weeks and modifications of it. And a lot of the changes I made was how it got passed. But that is what a lot I do. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and my goal there is to continue that. But if I do have one goal that I'd like to do in the next 4 years is we now are having children, people having children here in Missouri. We want them to have the babies born, but we want those babies to be loved and cared for. So we have to do something about making it easier for adoptions to occur and people ready to adopt these children, and also that financially they can afford it. It's costing private adoptions of $25,000 to $40,000. Most people can't afford that. We have great middle class people who make great parents, and they would gladly adopt. Right now, if you want to adopt, you have to go, you know, private adoption, get a child from somewhere else, and it's very expensive. We need to make sure that every child that's born is also loved and wanted. If a parent doesn't want the child and they're having a child and we want to try to keep it out of the foster system, because the foster care system is a good system, but it has its own challenges.
Okay, thank you. George.
I think my first priority would be to re-examine the gas tax bill and see if there's some way to get some relief from that. I have a nephew who has a small business. He's got a lawn mowing service, and he's had to raise prices on his customers just to keep gas in his vehicle and his equipment, and it's put a real strain on him. He's lost customers because of that, because he simply can't afford to service those people the way things are. I know that the gas increase isn't all attributed to this gas tax, but I think we need to re-examine production and refining processes and importation, so we can get some relief from that.
Okay. So George, next question will start with you. If asked, I imagine both of you would identify yourselves as conservative Republicans. Much of the last legislative session, even in area races, the discussion has been about if the office holder or the challenger is conservative enough. So define for us what a conservative is in your mind and how that compares perhaps to what your opponent's vision is. So George, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I think conservative, for me, kind of means a little less government and a little more control from the people, and to determine what the people want and really try to act on their behalf and pass legislation that they want passed. And if you're not asking the people what they want, I don't understand how you can really represent someone if you don't ask them what they want you to do. So conservatively speaking, I think they would bring that message to me.
Okay. Rudy, same question.
I believe when we look at legislation, we first see, is there a problem? Do we need legislation? The second one would be, how do we pass legislation and get the problem solved with the least amount of government interference? And just as an example, the gas tax, which we talked about. In my opinion, that was conservative because we looked at the need for it. The roads were deteriorating. Every day we put it off. Now, people don't realize in this gas tax bill, there is a provision in there also, and they have already been meeting. How are we going to address our future needs for roads and that? Because gas tax alone will never work anymore because we have electric cars out there. So we have a very good committee meeting now, different state leaders and private, looking at how we will address our economic needs on the roads in the future. Do we have toll roads? Well, right now we know that they're you don't have constitutional authority for them. There's different types of toll roads. Open toll roads versus what you're driving through Colorado and you buzz through and you get home, you're in the passing lane. You know, that may work for some things. I'm not telling them how to solve the problem, but that bill gives them authority to look into the future and take care of our needs. Passing debt down to your children because we don't want to address it is not being conservative.
Okay. Rudy, next question. What are 2 issues you'd like to see addressed in the next session of the legislature? Just 2.
One, the one I mentioned earlier, because I have dealt with a lot of people already in my LA. You know, it's 3 to 4 years to get a child adopted through the foster care, and then you got all the time concerns about whether they're going to take the child back or not. Well, if we have private adoptions, that process can be speeded up. But most people can't afford it. So if we're going to, we need to really work on that so we can have quicker adoptions and people can afford to get it. I mean, there are just a lot of people who I talk to say, well, we had to take a mortgage out on the home. You know, asking people to be in foster care and we're going to adopt in 2 or 3 years and then they put up with some of the problems, it's challenging. And so we need to work on that. I mean, we don't want abortions, but we want those children to be born and loved. The other thing, if I could accomplish anything, is that we spend more time in the legislature working with the leadership to deal with the day-to-day problems of our government. It doesn't all have to be about a whole term being tied up on one single issue and everybody filibustering. You know, we have to learn to work together and get along. There should never be a day when a senator is referring to another senator as a liar on the floor. In the practice of law, we learn to have respect for the court and our fellow lawyers. We may disagree, and we have a right to disagree, and that's our obligation. But if there's anything to bring back what when I would go to the Capitol many years ago, that respect for each other and the idea that we need to get something done. It's all not about one issue. No one should have one issue and only one issue, and that's all they're talking about, because there are 100 different issues come up every day.
Okay. George, same question.
Well, one of the things I'd like to look into, I've been walking the streets and run into a lot of elderly people, and I know they're on fixed income, so am I. I'm probably better off than many of them in rural Cole County. And the tax situation for them only goes up, it never goes down. Their income usually does not go up, and the price of everything else increases, and it puts a burden on them. And I'm hoping we can find a way to lower the tax burden for our senior citizens, possibly the personal property tax, or possibly even looking at school tax. I haven't had a child in school for 25 years, but I still pay the tax. Doesn't mean I don't support the schools. It just means that for older people, that's really a burden on them, and some of them lose their homes because they just can't afford the taxes anymore to keep up with the inflation. Another one, I kind of agree with my opponent here on birth control and abortion and adoption. I'd really like to see these kids have a chance. They're you know, if we get rid of the abortion, these kids are born into situations, and they need to be loved and cared for. And I hope we can find ways to improve their situation and make adoption easier for those kids.
Okay. So much of the debate today seems to be about the proper role of government, whether it be federal, state, or local government. So what do you believe is the proper role for each of these sectors of government? So George, we'll start with you.
Well, the GOP platform is government governs best when it governs least. And, you know, I think the people are generally pretty smart and they know what's best for them. And I believe if you ask them, they'll tell you what's best for them. And certainly I'm one of those people that would like to be asked what I think and have whoever represents me act on you know, what my concerns are and what I would like to see happen. So, you know, for all those levels of government, we govern for the people. And that's what we should be doing, is meeting the needs of the people instead of individuals or special interest groups.
Okay.
Can you
Rudy,
rephrase
same
your
question.
question again?
Sure. Much of the debate today is the proper role of government, whether it's federal, state, or local. What do you believe is the proper role for each of these sectors of government?
Well, as I stated earlier, first, you shouldn't go up there and pass legislation to create a crisis or a bill that's not necessary. So least government means you take every bill and you first see, is there really a problem there? Is that a problem we should address? Can it be done at a local level? For instance, if we were messing around what school board should do, is it handled better by the school board? Is it handled better by the city? Start with the lowest form of government. If there is a problem, then you go from there, and each step as you go through, you take the time to not only look at the bill and what you're trying to solve, but the collateral consequences. You know, you say, well, I want to get rid of property tax. You ought to have a way to you're going to replace that, because unless you're going to be cutting out a whole lot of other benefits for schools or our fire districts and that. So the role of us should be the least amount of government if a bill is necessary. But when you do pass that bill, don't pass it just because it's going to make somebody happy. You look at the collateral consequences of it, and if you're going to cut taxes here, unless someone's willing to give up a benefit or we're willing to cut out benefits, you have to find an alternative. And then you see what the effect of that is. So it is not passing bills that are just popular. It is passing bills that are thought out of collateral consequences, and try to use the statute to do it, not the Constitution. The Constitution is not your operating manual when you cannot go back and change. When we pass something by statute, we can look at it in a year and say, we messed up, or this is what needs to be fixed. And we can go in and do it. When you do it with the Constitution, that's impossible to go back. You got to go back to the vote of the people, and there can be minor things in there that we suddenly see. You know, our Missouri Constitution is about this thick, U.S. is about this thick. And that's one of my goals, is to try to keep back, is that the first wave or second wave? Okay, one of my goals up there is that don't add everything to the Constitution just because it sounds good. That's not the place of our Constitution. It should be guiding on certain principles, not the day-to-day operations. And so it is important that we go with statutes everywhere you can and not be messing with the Constitution every time.
Okay. So let me ask a follow-up question of both of you. So a common refrain from the legislature, previous sessions, has been there's too much federal overreach. There are unfunded mandates from the federal government upon the state. I mean, that's anyone in that capital would tell you that's the case on a variety of subjects. But as state legislators, what sort of overreach has there been at the local level that you think maybe the state House, the state Senate overreached a bit and put too much of a burden on local governments? So we'll start with George.
That's a tough question for me, because I haven't been in the legislature. But once again, I think Rudy's right. Things should be solved at the lower level of government, and be solved by the people instead of by people in Washington, D.C. They don't understand our local needs like we do, And we should be able to solve those problems here without interference from federal government.
Okay. Rudy, same question.
Well, you know, we all talk about federal government overreach, but we never say no when they hand out money. And to start with, we have to learn how to say no. A common example is, you know, when the Catholic schools at the cafeteria, they were complaining that one of my, that they had to follow these federal regulations. I said, no, you don't. Just don't take the money. Well, that doesn't work either. So, we do have to constantly keep track of keeping the federal government out of everything because, you know, I can remember when DWI rates were, you know, they said you had to raise it to .13. If you didn't do it, the breathalyzer, they took away your federal funds. So we have to look at when we're taking money from the federal government to look at how it's being used and what the strings are attached to it, and recognize that if we're going to take it, there are going to be strings, and it's hard to, you just ask anybody, we're all opposed to big government, but we ask what 5 government benefits you're getting, which ones do you want to give up? And that's a harder burden. And every time we try on one, and certain groups get, you know, so as a legislature, we always have to look at the federal money, try not to get there, and express our concerns. And when there's opportunities that you know, we're filing lawsuits now against them where their administrative staff is acting outside or doing things beyond their scope of authority too. You know, their authority is specifically defined by the Constitution, and what's not there is ours. And so we must constantly exercise our 10th Amendment right to those rights that are reserved to the states. And we're seeing that now more and more on guns and other issues.
Okay. Let's go to our next question. We're going to talk about gas tax. You both discussed it a bit earlier, but let's go a little bit deeper on it. So what is the solution if it's, I think as we mentioned in the previous forum, I think we would all agree the state of the state's roads and bridges are deteriorating and need attention. So what is the best approach if it's not a gas tax? What is the best approach to try to fund that? And we'll start with Rudy.
You're asking the wrong person, because as a legislature, I know there are people out in the industry that know a whole lot more than I do. And we have committees up there now, and not just legislative committee, a statewide committee looking at the alternative. We're bringing in the experts, and they're going to look at the feasibility of open toll roads. You know, like maybe we could do part of I-70, we could put a 3rd lane in there, and you go over there, you can drive that. Maybe we can go, you know, do we need toll roads? We know we can't do that without going back to the people, but long-term plans is what we need because it's changing. And saying, well, I'm going to, say, oh, well, let's use toll roads. I think toll roads are the answer. I'm not that smart. There are people, you have to bring in the right engineers and people doing the traffic study, and you have to bring in the people who know what will pass and what can pass with the voters. So anything I say is just, you know, so that's what I'm a big supporter of. Get up there, get the right people, and then go at it with taking nothing off the table. We will look at whether it's increased gas tax, it's increased charges for electric cars, increased charges for, or less money going to the bridge, to the other parts that's funded through the, you know, to the highway patrol, or are they getting more than they need? You know, anything. It should be go there with an open mind, bring in the right experts, and then listen. You know, that as a lawyer, we always hired experts on everything, and then we would take that information and try to come up with a solution. And that's what we need to do there. For me to tell you the solution is, my ego is running amok, if I can tell you that.
Okay. George?
Our former gas tax was 17 cents on a gallon. The 2.5 cent increase doesn't sound like much. And in fact, it's not. But when you do it over and over 5 years in a row, and that gas tax gets up to 29 cents, 29.5 cents, then that's a 74% increase in our gas tax. Again, that's not that big a burden compared to the price of gasoline at the moment. I think if we can lower the price of gasoline at the base, then the tax burden isn't as severe on us because the price of the gasoline is lower. So, and I think the solution is to get our gas prices back down so that the consumer isn't, man, I hate going and spending $90 every time I fill up. and I know everybody else doesn't like it either. So if we can lower that base on the gasoline, then, like I said, the increase in the tax isn't as harmful.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily address, so you're suggesting, if I'm understanding, that if we had control over the price of the base price of gasoline, which we don't, right? If that came down, then the gas tax would be more palatable in your view.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. Do you believe it would be sufficient to fund the infrastructure needs going forward?
Well, the people who passed it thinks it is, but you know, I know our roads need repair, and will continue even after we get done with this round of stuff. That's not over. We're always going to have to revisit this. So you know, there's no clear and easy end in sight, but we're paying a lot more for gas than we did a year ago, and it does hurt people. Commuters, you know, are feeling the brunt of that. I've got a niece that runs back and forth to Columbia. She's a nurse up there, and I mean, it's a lot on them to pay that kind of money, and they need some relief. And I hope we can find a way to bring prices down so that it's not that burdensome.
Okay. Let's go to our next question. During the last session, transgender issues became a hot button issue. What legislation on this topic would you support if you're elected? And we'll start with George.
There's been a lot of talk about boys and girls sports and how the boys would have an advantage over the girls, and it's true. They've got bigger muscular and skeletal physiques, and but that door, we don't talk about the door swinging the other way about girls competing in boys sports. And I have a nephew who had to wrestle a girl when he was about 13, and I don't know if y'all have seen a wrestling match, but that was difficult for him. And if he won, he beat a girl. If he loses, he got beat by a girl. And it took him to the third round before he finally decided to just grab a hold where he needed to grab a hold and pin her. And but it was embarrassing for this kid. So you know, it's not just boys and girls; it's girls and boys. And I don't think there's a place for it.
So to the question, what legislation would you support if you're elected?
Does the legislature really need to get in on that? Shouldn't it be the schools and the parents that say, no, we're not going to have that? Let's get it down to the level where the control should be.
Okay. Rudy, same question.
Well, first off, you say, shouldn't there be legislation? I've learned that covers a lot of areas. Last year, there's 20-some bills on critical race theory. So what it means is when you get down in detail to it. But certainly, it should be maintained at the school district level, everything you possibly can. There are some federal guidelines we have to comply with. But I know that when boys compete with girls, they are at an advantage. And I know that they have challenges in life if they're transgender and that, but we all have challenges in life. Sports, you know, they didn't make a short man's basketball team for me because I was short. You know, they didn't, move my goal up. And we all have challenges in life, and whether they're transgender or not, I know that's a challenge for them, but we don't have the answer for every challenge for everybody in life. We can't make everything fair. And so I would have to find some awful, or I can't imagine anything that would say that I would support boys going into girls' sports and that. I think you're doing them a disservice. We have challenges in our life, and we have to meet them. Like I said, I was short. I wasn't going to play on a basketball team. Generally speaking, short people don't earn as much money as tall people. So should we make a special rule for me to lower tax break so I feel okay? I just don't go there. I mean, I feel sorry for them. I understand their challenge because I met with a lot of them, and a lot of them are great people. But I don't think that we can make everything equal and fair for everybody.
Okay. So let's talk about critical race theory. So Tell me what your definition of critical race theory is, how you would explain it to me. We'll start with Rudy.
Like I said, there's 27 bills up there with critical race theory stuff addressing it, and no one knows the real definition. The closest I've come to, that I can get a general concept of it is just because you are a certain race or certain background, you have certain inherent characteristics that are unique just to your being. For instance, if you're raised here in America and you're a white Caucasian man, you are presumed to be racist. And if you're, they had the little triangle on that stuff. To the extent that is taught, I disagree with it. We are all equal, and that's what we should be teaching. We're all equal, given equal opportunity. And there are some times when, we have to, though, the flip side of that, everything to the extreme. There are sometimes affirmative action is good. And that's kind of based upon, is it critical race theory, or is it just that we see a need and we need to balance the playing field? But starting with the presumption that you are racist just because you are a certain background, that defeats we all start with the presumption that everybody's equal and should be treated equally.
Okay. George, same question.
Rudy, I believe you and I can totally agree on that particular concept. I don't want to see critical race theory taught to, not my children, but my grandchildren. I don't think there's a place for it in the schools. I think it raises little kids' questions that should be answered by parents, not teachers. And I think we should bow away from that, and hopefully it'll die on the vine. But it probably won't. People are gonna still keep bringing it up, but I don't think there's a place for it in the schools.
Okay. So follow-up question, we'll start with George on this one. So is there a legislative response to critical race theory? Is there legislation that you believe should be pursued that would allay any concerns you have about CRT?
See, once again, that's where government steps in, where it should be handled on a lower level. I think the states should handle it, which of course would be Rudy and myself, but it goes down to what the people's wants and needs are, and they don't want it. So do we have to pass legislation for something like that? I don't think we do. I think that the schools just say that we're not going to have it, and that's the end of it.
Rudy?
Well, I've seen legislation that would outlaw teaching of certain topics and all kinds of things, getting into theories and telling the school boards what books they could read to the students or students to study. Education is a learning experience, and the facts that things happened in the past are open for debate. And so the 1609, all those things, I think that it's not our role to meddle into the local school boards or their role to what they should teach about slavery, et cetera. But having said that, there was legislation, though, that I thought could pass and would be agreeable to most people, and it just never got through the whole mill. And that was one which I just talked about. We teach on the principle that we start on the principle that everybody's created equal, and you have to treat everybody as equal, and you teach it equality. You don't teach one race is inferior to another. You don't teach that one race is just because they're a certain race or racist or anything. Start on the principle that we're all equal, and that's what the Constitution treats us as. And maybe to reaffirm that so we understand we have our differences. We each have different challenges, but that's what we're all equal. And so that type of legislation I would support. What I wouldn't support is some legislation to go out there that go on the deep end of things and saying, what you can teach and cannot teach. That's a local school district rule. That's not our business, meddling with local school districts.
Okay.
If there's a violation, if someone feels they're violated by it, they have a remedy by going to the courts. If some student feels that he's being violated by his district by teaching him something wrong or something, that's what we have courts, and they can handle individual issues a whole lot better than we as a legislature can.
All right. So I've lost track here. I believe, George, you'll start with the next question. So last year, the legislature passed a grant initiative that would help schools bring their base teacher pay up to $38,000. Is that adequate? Would you try to build on that legislation? And if so, how?
nothing's more precious than our children and their educations. And I think that we need to do whatever we need to do to attract the most qualified teachers and experienced teachers and retain them. I think it's getting competitive out there. And I traveled the world on jobs, and I would take the one that paid the most. Teachers are going to do the same thing. If they can make more money somewhere else, I know they're dedicated to teaching and dedicated to schools, but they can be tempted like anyone else. So I think that we need to keep our options open for raises and keeping their pay competitive so that we can retain those teachers.
Rudy?
Well, I've been endorsed by, I think, 6 or 7 educational programs, from retired teachers to school teachers, school administrators, elementary teachers, because I do work with them a lot, and I understand the challenging they'll have. We have to take every step we can, because now we're starting to make teachers out as villains. And, blame the teachers for everything. They're not going to come back and keep working if it's miserable. And where do we get our next generation of workers from? From firemen, we get them from retired firemen. Lawyers, a lot of them come from retired lawyers. Teachers come from teaching families. If we make their life miserable, are they going to encourage their children to become teachers? And we keep making them the culprit for everything and don't pay them, we're not going to get good teachers. And I'm telling you, we can see the difference when you go look at, I've been on with Parish Council and Finance Committee at St. Stan, and even at our high school. I've worked well with our high school. If you can have one teacher who's not motivated, can make whole classes go down. We can't afford that. And you're not going to keep good teachers. I mean, our teachers now are married, they have kids, and they have demands too. And so we have to do everything we can to raise teacher salaries and help them become teachers, because if we don't, we're not going to have another generation of teachers.
Okay, so follow-up question to that. Jumping off on the point of doing everything that you can to raise the salary of teachers. So one of the criticisms of this initiative grant was for smaller districts, such as Eugene, let's say, it creates compression issues with wages, right? That you bring in these newer teachers that will be making more than existing teachers are. So it's a wholesale problem, and it's a local problem, going back to both of your earlier discussions. Local issues should be at the local level, not at the state level. So what is the state government's role in raising state teacher pay? So we'll start with George.
Well, again, we need to do what's necessary to ensure that we attract the best teachers and the most experienced teachers and retain them. And if there's legislation that can be passed to ensure that happens, maybe we should look into it. But as we've said before, both of us, I believe, that the school board is the one who should really have control over that. And I would hope that the school boards would communicate with each other to keep a competitive salary and benefits for those teachers that keeps them employed.
Rudy?
This is a reminder, on every bill we pass, we have to look at the collateral consequences of it and think them through. And in fact, though, it does not ever raise beginning teachers more than what teachers are existing. The way the system's set up, they're all going to get at least that much. But that is a problem, and there again, that goes back to open market and free market. I believe in giving the school districts enough money that they can decide how important it is they have a teacher. Some school districts may get by with paying a little less for teachers than a school district is sitting in the middle of St. Louis. So we need to give them the ability to make the decisions and let the free market. We know in our Catholic schools, we have to be competitive with the public schools. We pay accordingly. The public schools in Blair Oaks knows that they have to be competitive with Jeff City or we'll lose teachers. Give them the authority and let the free market work. Setting up there at the Capitol and telling them this fine line stuff, you're going to see collateral consequences, you're going to see unintended consequences, and you're going to, just getting elected doesn't make you any more intelligent.
Okay. In light of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, what legislation would you support in the next legislative session on the topic of abortion? Rudy.
First, I think we really need to see what legislation we have passed, what the true effects of that are. I am already hearing from various people on one issue that could well-being, and that is medically necessary abortions. There has to be a guideline on it, but right now, the doctors are saying we won't touch anybody, even if the mother's life is in danger, because if they do an abortion, that in and of itself becomes a crime unless they prove that it was medically necessary. We have no criminal laws hardly at all that make the burden fall upon the doctor. And the doctor then has to hire lawyers, hire experts, and take the risk of jeopardizing his whole career. And that lady may die. That's something we at least need to probably look at. But before we go adding to the bills and everything, we need to see what the true effect of our bill is, because it's not been in effect very long yet. So see what it does and how we can adjust it. And the good thing is, our bill is a statute. So if there are collateral consequences that can be adjusted, we can do that. But I am very much pro-life, and I know that it's a challenge, and it's easier for me to say because I'm not a woman, that, you know. But at the same token, I don't want abortions that are unnecessary. I don't want abortion as a form of birth control. And I want to make it so that people who find themselves in that position, and if we need legislation to help them out and help the adoption side of it out. Because we know on adoption, there's a problem. We know, as I see with work with Pregnancy Help Center and other groups, that these women, a lot of them really want the children, but it's economically and just, they don't know what to do and how they're gonna handle it. If they truly don't want their children, I want it towards a smooth transition to a family that loves them. So we are gonna need legislation there. The rest of the bill, you know, we don't even know, and everybody's got different interpretations of what it means. I read today a whole series from one expert what it means, and he would say, and this area is cloudy. So we don't need to start changing something until we know what it is.
Okay. George?
I've got an unfortunate experience that's very close to this topic. My daughter was having some trouble with the pregnancy, and the kids had twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. I won't go into the details of that, but they were both dying and they were killing her. And she laid on her back for 3 weeks in a hospital bed with her feet up, trying to keep these kids alive long enough to deliver them. It came very close to, we would have had to abort those children to save her life. And I'm gonna be honest with you, if that had been the case, I would have chosen the abortion, because that's my only girl. But we did save both boys. They were born. One was in Texas Children's Hospital's level 4 neonatal NIC unit for 109 days. The other one passed after 7 weeks. But if I would have had to give them up to save her, that's a medical emergency. Luckily, we didn't. And she got through it, and both the boys survived, except one of them had other issues that he couldn't make it. But, so I am for abortion if it's medically required. But if it's a couple of kids performing an adult act in the back of the old Chevy, I'm sorry, grow up, face the consequences, and be an adult. And I hope we can have mechanisms in place to take care of that child. If they can't handle it, then we should provide methods and means where that child can be cared for and loved and survive.
Okay. Let's move on to a different topic. Governor Parson has said he'll call a special session on the topic of tax relief. What sort of tax relief do you believe is realistic and will sustain the state's operation while giving relief to taxpayers? We'll start with George.
Again, I mentioned earlier the personal property tax. I paid my first personal property tax when I was 16. I didn't own anything. I had a job, and since I had a job, trying to remember, Henry LePage sent me a little note and said I owed him money, and it was like 30 bucks. I was clearing about $40 a week at the time, and I couldn't get out of it. I had to give him my money for possessions. I went and argued the fact that I don't own anything. I live at my parents' house. They buy my clothes, you know. So maybe we need to take another look at methods other than the personal property tax. I've lived in several states that don't have it. And there are other methods of getting tax other than personal property tax. And within that personal property tax is other taxes that are a burden to senior citizens. And maybe we need to revisit that and see if there's not some alternative things that we can do instead of that, or at least reduce it, but I'd like to look at that, yeah.
All right. Rudy, same question.
Well, Governor Parsons has indicated what he wants to do. I have great respect for Governor Parsons, and I have great respect for our budget chairman, and they all believe that his 1% decrease in income tax will not put us in economic jeopardy. I like low taxes like everyone, but not if it's going to take away our basis and we can't economically operate. But they believe that. I think that's going to pass. The $500 million, which was a one-time deal going out, is a one-time shot in the arm. The 1% is a long-term, and their studies show that with the economy the way it's growing, we can sustain it. And so that's probably, I mean, I will be voting for that when it comes through, if it's what I think it is.
Okay. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper on taxes. You both have talked a little bit about it. When we talk about property taxes, as we mentioned earlier, they're the local revenue sources for school boards, school districts, libraries, fire departments, etc. So if the property taxes are eliminated or reduced, how would you suggest those entities should be funded? And what's the strength of doing it by a different taxing function or a different funding function? So we'll start with Rudy.
Well, as part of our education, I have an ag econ degree, which was a lot of tax courses, econ courses, accounting courses. And I asked the teacher one day, I said, why don't we just eliminate all taxes and just print money? And you'll see what happens. The inflation that we got now, and you dump all the money out there. Sales tax sound good, but they're getting higher already, and they are very, very hard on what we call regressive. The poor people are going to pay lower income people are going to pay a whole lot bigger portion of their money going to taxes, percentage-wise, than what the wealthy are. That's kind of opposite of what the income tax does. The income tax, the more you make, the more you pay. And, so unless they can show me some method that won't be regressive on the working class who are using all their, to buy groceries and those things, gas and their clothes, and they're paying taxes on, they're using 100% of their money, I don't know an answer that I'm going to support. Just dropping all property tax, putting it on sales tax. I mean, you go out and buy your kids' clothes and you're on, on a $40,000 income, 3 kids, and you got to buy it all on school clothes, and you got to pay all the additional tax on it. That's a pretty hard hit. Unless they come up with some way we want to reduce benefits, and it's easy to get people to vote to reduce taxes, but you start taking away benefits, and it's pretty exciting how some people get.
Yeah. George, same question.
Earlier, Mr. Veed mentioned that Governor Parsons was considering lowering the income tax by 1%. I don't know what the total of that is, how much money that encompasses, but I'm sure it's pretty healthy. And I just wonder if that's a burden we already have. We're already paying that 1%. And I just wonder if leaving that alone might offset the need for the increase in the gas tax. Maybe they'll balance each other out. Might even be a surplus.
Okay.
I mean, we'd be taking away income that we're already getting
Mm-hmm.
and then relying on another source to increase input.
Right. One thing you mentioned earlier that just piqued my interest, you had mentioned about the idea of senior citizens needing tax relief, and specifically citing schools. You mentioned you don't have a child in school anymore. So do you perceive that it's a duty that senior citizens should have to support the school districts? I mean, should there be a moratorium when senior citizens don't have to pay taxes
Or
on property
maybe
taxes?
maybe it's less when they turn 65. Maybe we find an age where we go, okay, you've done your duty. you've supported schools for a long time. Maybe you need some break from that. I don't know if you eliminate it completely, but how about a reduction? How about, you know, some percentage we can say, okay, we can, you know, grandma and grandpa don't need to do this anymore.
Right. As someone who doesn't have kids in school, though, I would ask, I'm assuming the people that worked on my car this afternoon needed an education. So there is some benefit to the senior citizens through that function, right?
I'm sure there is, but again, you know, I've paid school tax for many years, and I believe in education. I have a degree in education, so I believe in education for our kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wonder who really needs to be paying for it, and if they have to pay, if seniors should have to pay an equal amount, because I think they've paid their dues.
Okay. Rudy, same question.
Well, you start with seniors on fixed income. This one's probably gonna get me in trouble. I'm on fixed income. No, I'm not either, but if I were, you know, and I'm of that age, I'd get a break. But I don't need, you know, I'm not on fixed income, so maybe I don't get the break. But we have a lot of working class people on fixed incomes too. And you're gonna put the burden more upon them? And our education is the background of our society. And we all benefit from the kids that are getting well educated and the doctors coming up with new technology and that. That's not something, you know, it's all our responsibility that we have a well-educated society, and we all benefit from it. I mean, I'll give you an example. One time I was campaigning for a bond issue at Blair Oaks, and somebody said, well, your kids all go to Elias. Why are you out here campaigning for money for Blair Oaks? And my answer was pretty simple. I don't know what stray dog my kids are going to bring home. I just prefer they all be well-educated. You know, and that it's like at church when we have a parish school. It's not the parents' sole responsibility. It's part of our mission as a parish to have a school and to provide a great education. And sometimes us seniors can more afford to educate and pay for education than we could when we were young and had 2 or 3 or 4 kids in school at the same time and weren't making much money. You know, it's part of our role in society to provide a good education. And so while I don't want to be against tax cuts, I hate taxes like everybody else. But I also know that they serve a role. And so just, you know, everybody's got a reason why their tax should be cut. Mine is I'm old. My other one is because we're on fixed income, or I'm disabled, or I'm a veteran. You know, all that sounds good, and they're all heartbreaking to say no to, but you still have to have a certain amount of income to run this country with.
Okay.
And I'll hear about that.
George?
Just one other thing, that, you know, I've talked to a lot of people in their 70s and later, and it's getting difficult for them because the price of everything's going up, and their income is not. So it does have an effect on them, and a lot of these older people are having to go out and find some type of meaningful employment, and that some of it's kind of demeaning. I'm telling you, there's only so many jobs at Walmart where you're the greeter, and the other stuff is hard for them, and it's hard for someone in their 70s to find a job, regardless of what they did in their careers. They just, you know, if you have a 23-year-old and a 73-year-old walk in the door, you're probably going to hire the 23-year-old. I know you're not supposed to, but you're gonna. So it's hard for those people to supplement their income, and I think they need some help.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure.
Okay. Now, if you're going to do something and you find a way we're going to reduce property tax and we've got another way of enforcing it, it would make more sense to do it based upon income. A young family that's on a fixed income, say $40,000, and a retired person on $40,000, maybe give them a break. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you're looking at it and say, well, here's a retired guy and they're making a couple $100,000, give them a break and put a higher burden upon this young couple that's starting out. So, I mean, you have to look at all the bills and all the consequences. Just how do you tell somebody, an older person, no, you don't need a tax break? It's not politically wise to do that. You get competition, you get people running against you and say you're anti-seniors and all this stuff. But realistically, if you're going to do something, let's think it through and see who we best can help and where it's most efficiently used. Because I'm telling you, there's a lot of couples starting out. They're struggling just as hard as retired people are.
Okay. Let's go to our next question. Let's talk about gun rights. What legislation would you support if elected? So we'll start with George.
Well, I'm all for the Second Amendment. I have my great-grandfather's only 12-gauge shotgun. You can't have it. So I don't see where we need more legislation for gun control. There's already enough of it out there. In central Missouri, I don't see that we have that big of an issue, not like some of these other places that are, but you never know what's going to happen, where it's going to happen. But, you know, adding more legislation, I don't think is going to solve any of the issues regarding who owns a gun and how they use it.
Okay. Rudy.
Well, I have guns, more than I need, not as many as I want, but certainly more than I need. And I believe fundamentally in the Second Amendment right to bear arms. It's very important just because historically it's part of our life, it's part of our Constitution. Now, all constitutional rights can have some limits. Does that mean I have a right to have a surface-to-air missile because the military makes one? No. So there are some limits, but I don't know what those exact limits are. I mean, I hear, you know, the AR-15s, you call them assault weapons, I call them, you know. But that's where I think that there's going to be legislation coming up from certain people. If nothing is done and we still have mass shootings with people with 30 and 40 round clips, I worry about what's going to happen because not everybody loves their guns like we do. And there's large areas in the cities that don't. So maybe if we have to do something to lower that at a more reasonable level, 15 rounds or 30 rounds, because as I said, you know, you can have 15 rounds and you can have 4 magazines that do the same thing. But if there's something that stops some major law coming at us, I mean, major legislation, say no way, no one can have a gun that holds 10 rounds or something, you know, that's concerning. But those are things when you look in the future, what's going to happen if we don't, you know, we keep having mass shootings. Not everybody loves guns like I do, and we do, and have respect for them. Not everybody's trained to have them. Are we going to be setting ourselves up that we're going to get enough people in the Kansas City and St. Louis area that are going to pass gun legislation that we don't want? So it is always something you look at and consider, looking into the future and see what's going on. But Second Amendment is there. It will always be there. We have not done anything right now to hurt it, and I don't see anything passing that will hurt it. But I do see that at some stage we may have to look at some things. Because there are people who are in favor of the Second Amendment told me that anything the military has, we can have. Well, we know that that's just probably not going to fly. So I don't need a surface-to-air missile, but I do like my guns.
Okay. All right, well, let's go through some of the further restrictions that have been imposed just to officially get you on the record for them. So, so we'll start with Rudy. Should training be required before a gun can be purchased? Why or why not?
Well, on conceal and carry, we had to have training, and I had a daughter went with me. I think she learned one thing. She better learn how to shoot a whole lot better before she starts carrying. But you got to weigh what the law says and how much training, because the right to control training would actually can bear directly on the right to own. You know, the right to tax, and it could be the right to eliminate. So we allow too much training and you don't have strict limits, then they're going to use that as a method to prohibit ownership. Background checks, you know, they don't seem to bother me. I mean, you want to know who's got a gun and who doesn't. Because if we just leave it out there uncontrolled, wrong guns are going to end up in the wrong hands. There are guns that are ready with criminals, but there are going to be guns ended up with people who are mentally challenged and have mental issues and are going to go out and do some serious harm. And that reflects bad back on everybody with guns.
George, same question.
There's a requirement now that if you want to get a hunting license and you're young, you have to go through training to show that you're capable of handling a weapon and know what you're doing and you can handle it safely. Criminals don't have to do that to own a gun. They just go get them and use them, and no legislation you pass is going to make an outlaw go take the training and swear that he's going to not, you know, do something wrong with that weapon. It's just not going to happen. So you can pass all the legislation you want, and you can't fix the problem of the criminals using guns the way they want to use guns. The honest folks will go and take their training and learn how to use a firearm safely in the field, and that's what they use it for. They don't use it in the classroom.
Okay. Next question, George. Should there be restrictions on the purchase of assault weapons, AR-15s, those type of weapons, and high-capacity magazines?
As Mr. Schulte said before, the high-capacity magazines aren't the issue because you can grab 10 low-capacity magazines and very quickly switch those in and out. I'm pretty sure they have to do a background check when you buy a weapon to start with. We need to make sure those background checks are adequate, and they do. People are vetted properly so that you don't have criminals or people with mental issues that purchase those guns. But you're never going to cover them all. There's a lot of people out there that have mental issues that you can't tell something's wrong with them, and so, you know, the background checks are good, and it's the best thing we've got right now. And I don't know that there's any legislation could be passed to make them even better. So I think they're doing what they can, and I hope we don't have to suffer any consequences for ones that miss people.
Rudy, same question.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Should there be restrictions on the purchase of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines?
Well, we have restrictions on them now. I think you have to be 18 or 21 to buy them. But again, it's not the weapon that's causing the harm, it's the people who are using them. And if they want to, they will make it in a gun. They can carry multiple clips. More importantly, you know, it's kind of late to say let's eliminate them. There are so many of them out there, and the people that really want them have them, and the people that use them illegally already have them. So I don't know what legislation we're going to actually pass that's going to solve the problem. And so, and you will notice I don't make that many commitments on legislation because every bill is different and have a lot of collateral consequences. You know, and we don't know what the future is going to hold. I mean, certainly if they're getting guns out there that have 100 rounds to them, 200 rounds to them, you know, where do you draw the line? That's what we're there to listen to the pros and cons and the experts and try to arrive at a common sense decision. And sometimes that will make some people mad and make some people happy. But that's the decisions that we're there to make and take the heat for it.
Okay. So, last question on this subject. So, and on this one, let's talk less about the criminals that buy the guns off the streets. We're talking more about the domestic violence incident, the student who's disenfranchised with what's going on. So should there be restriction, or should Missouri have a red flag law that would allow judges to remove firearms from someone who's considered a danger to themselves or others? And we'll start with George.
Difficulty would be determining who should be controlled by that red flag law. I mean, by the time you figure out a person shouldn't have a gun, it's probably too late. So I don't know how you implement that. I don't know how you start it. I don't know how you point at people and say, "Ooh, you shouldn't have a gun." Is it because of the way they look, because of the color of their skin, because they're too short, can't play basketball? Is it, what? How do you set the regulations for who should or should not be pointed at when you pass legislation like that? I don't see where you can come up with something that would be suitable.
Rudy?
Well, certainly, if someone is violent and saying he's going out to kill everybody and he's been arrested for something else, or he's going to go to some school and that, we need to have some method out there to prevent that. And so the problem is how you draft the legislation, and also it should require more than just the arbitrary decision of one judge or whatever. I mean, the judge makes a decision, but it should require some medical testimony. If you have medical testimony and a psychiatrist or psychologist come in and say this guy has mental issues, he's a threat to others, he's a threat to his family, you know, we have a choice. Lock him up and keep him locked up away from the world, or let him out but make sure he doesn't have a gun. Those are tough decisions, but but that option has to be there with our court system. But we need the restrictions that cannot be just the policeman running in and say, this guy shouldn't have a gun, I don't, you know, or police officer. It should require some medical testimony.
Okay. All right, gentlemen, my last question. So, why are you running? Simply, it would be easier to stay home. The conversations at the Capitol might be invigorating, but they can also be frustrating. Why are you wanting to get either return or get into this fray? So we'll start with Rudy.
Well, I've been involved in community activities in every different organization in Jeff City for as long as I can remember. That was partly the way we were raised. Our family was involved. I also owe society a bunch. They gave me a good public education, gave me the ability to earn a living, earn a good living, have a family. I owe people. I was in a car wreck where I was basically dead, and doctors came by and saved me, and what people gave me. I owe back to society back to what they have given me. The people that have helped me when I was in need, I can't repay them a lot of those back. So I have an obligation, and I have everybody in every society is run by time, talent, and treasure. I have the time, I have the talent, I have a good education. I've been in litigation. I've been in business. I've solved all kinds of litigation, from product liability to ultralight airplane crashes I was involved in, to computer litigation. I have that training. And society invested in that. I owe them back to at least use it to the extent some pay back what I've been given. I have time. My legal practice is cutting back. My family and my wife are tolerant of me, and sometimes my wife believes it's easier to get along with me in small doses, so it works both. and treasure. I've been very fortunate in the practice of the law that I can retire and not have to, you know, I have been fortunate in the practice of law, so I have those things to give. And to do nothing, my upbringing would give me a very guilty conscience to just check out right now and do nothing. I have that talent and treasure, and it needs to be used. And I want that example for my children and grandchildren to do. You know, every society is evolved on everybody giving something: time, talent, and treasure. And some of us have talent, some of us have time, and some have treasure. It takes everything to make a good society, just like a parish church or school. The schools are made by the community, not by just the teachers or the students. It takes everybody. And that's the same with our society. And I have been blessed, and it's time I give back.
Okay. George.
Work took me away from Jefferson City for many years, and I returned about 3 years ago. And I was at my niece's softball game, and Mr. Veed showed up, and I asked my brother-in-law, I said, who's that? And he said, that's your representative. You're going to vote for him. And I asked him why. And he said, well, he's the only one running. And that struck a nerve with me. I didn't have a choice. And I think the people deserve a choice on who they vote for. And I think if I hadn't stepped up, there probably wouldn't be anybody else challenging Mr. Veed for this position. So I'd like to give the people a choice. And then I thought, well, if you're going to run, what are you going to do? If you're not going to do something different, go ahead and go play golf and go hunting and go fishing. And I've got that opportunity to do that. I'm retired. So I thought, what would I want a representative to do for me that might be different? And I've never had a representative contact me and say, here's a copy of the summary of the bill. Here's the hidden agenda in that bill. If we vote yes, this can happen. If we vote no, this can happen. What do you want me to do? So I actually want to ask the people their opinion on whether a bill should be passed or not. And it's real easy to do it. With my work, I got really good at bulk emails. In one position, we had 56,000 employees in 80 countries. And I had 728 direct reports. And my only method of communicating with people in China and Middle East and Australia and Peru and Chile and, you know, all those countries was through emails. And I got real good at it. And it's very easy to send them a bulk email with that information. I don't even have to type the summary. It's already typed up. You cut it, you paste it, and you hit send. And all those people can respond to you with their opinion, and that's what I should follow.
Okay. So let's go to our closing statements. All right. So let's start with George. You're up next.
Okay. a lot of my closing statement, I just said it.
Well, there we go.
But I do want to offer the people a choice. I would like them to have an opportunity to vote for someone who they think is the best. And a couple years ago, they didn't have a choice. So I'm offering you an alternative. I think my idea of contacting people and asking them their opinion, shouldn't a representative ask someone what they want? And if you don't, how can you represent someone if you don't ask them and then meet their needs? So that was my goal, actually, when I set out to do this, was just to communicate with the people, to be open and honest, and to try to find out what they really want, and go from there and vote in a decision that they would be happy with.
All right, thank you. Rudy?
Well, I have communicated with people. For 40-some years, I've been here in Jeff City. I've been on about every organization you can think of, and I go to all the ball games. There are many ball games. I have grandkids and kids involved in sports. I go to the parish picnics. I deal with the different, and I know I do talk to people. And I know that in the legislature, there's 12 to 1,500 people, bills, and bills may get amended 8 to 10 times a day, and some bills have as much as 40 amendments put on in one day. My constituents are workers. They have other things to do. They're not going to stay at home, take 5 months out of their year to sit at home and read all the bills. That's what they elect me to do, to make decisions. I should listen to them. A lot of them have lobbyists. I talk to them. When there's controversial bills, I hear about it. They will tell me, but my role is to listen to them. But my role is to look at the bill and all the consequences and sometimes make the tough decision. And that's what I do when I'm there, and I hope to continue that. I hope to continue my role as up there as work with legislatures, being in-house counsel for a lot of them on their bills, and using my time and talent and treasure to get common sense bills through.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate your willingness to listen to the questions and answer them and respond. On behalf of the News Tribune, I'd also like to thank the city for the use of the council chambers again. I would encourage those who are here or who are listening, if you have questions that we didn't get to, subjects that you would have questions specifically for, you can send emails to vote@newstribune.com. We'll reach out to George and Rudy and get their responses. We'll certainly have coverage in tomorrow's News Tribune, as well as follow-up coverage this weekend on this race. Our whole intent behind all of this is to help make sure that you know who you're electing in this election cycle. So please invest your time to research the candidates and then get out and vote on August 2nd. So again, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Thank you in the crowd who are here, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.